here so I don't look so weird.
Welcome to the 21st Century Writer Podcast, a podcast devoted to helping you establish the mindset that will allow you and your writing to flourish in the new world of self-publishing. My name is Diane Patterson, and I'm an author and blogger, and with me is my co-host.
I'm Hannah Steenbock. I'm a German author, therapist, and coach, and I write fantasy, and I love creating the show.
And with us today, today we were going to discuss the book Take Off Your Pants by Libbie Hawker, but instead we did it one better, and we brought in Libbie Hawker to talk to you about her book.
Hi, here I am.
Which really reduces the need for us to vamp a lot. So Libbie's book is on outlining your novel, and part of the her impetus for doing this is because if you want to be a professional author, you'd better be able to plan getting your books out. And one of the best ways of doing that, well, you can pants your novels, and maybe it works, and maybe it doesn't. And I'm here to tell you that sometimes it doesn't work. However, there is a way to outline where you don't feel like you're in a straitjacket. So, Libbie, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay.
Can you tell us a little bit about your history of writing, and how you ended up deciding to do this book?
Sure. Well, I have been serious about my writing since about 2008, really trying to get my books finished and get some product out there. And I originally was pursuing a traditional publishing kind of route. Worked with a couple of agents, kept trying to sell my books, and I didn't have any luck on that avenue, so I finally ended up self-publishing my first book in late 2011. It was September or October of 2011. And it just kind of took off from there, and once I realized how much fun self-publishing was, and I was making pretty good money with it too, I pulled all my books from submission with agents and publishers, and I just started self-publishing everything. And then, much to my surprise, in September of 2014, I actually had a few publishers approach me about acquiring some of my books, and I did end up taking a contract with one of them, which was Lake Union Publishing, and they actually, my book I self-published, Tidewater, which they acquired, is being re-released by them in just a couple of days here on the 19th. Excuse me. And I've got another book coming out from them in December, and we're currently in the proposal process for a third book and all that good stuff. But I still do self-publish the majority of my work. I currently operate 2 active pen names. I'm about to launch a third. And I publish about 13 to 14 books a year. So,
wow.
High volume.
Are these full-length novels, or?
Most of them are full-length. Some of them are novellas in the 30 to 40,000 word range, so a little bit on the shorter side. Some of them are even smaller. Some of the products I publish are even smaller, more 20 to 25,000 words, but I don't really count those as I published a book until I've done 2 or 3 of those. So I kind of count them in 40 to 50,000 word chunks.
So these would be the writing books that you've been coming out with?
The writing books, and also I have a serial romance that I do under another pen name.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so little installments of the serial. Yeah. So that's that. And I used to write just purely kind of by the seat of my pants, as they say, and I really enjoy writing that way. I can see why people are so devoted to it. It's a lot of fun. It provides a lot of creative discovery. And
what's going to happen today?
Yeah, exactly. You don't really know where it's going, and it's fun to just see where what you wrote yesterday takes you today. It's very enjoyable, but I certainly found as I started getting to the point where I knew I wanted to succeed with self-publishing, which would require really putting a lot of products out as quickly as I could manage, I realized very quickly that I had to switch to a process that would allow much greater efficiency, because one of the things that happens when you kind of go by the seat of your pants is that you end up doing a lot of kind of waste words where you'll write off into some other direction, and then after 2 weeks or something you'll be like, oh, everything I wrote for the past 2 weeks is now unusable, and you have to kind of go back 30, 40,000 words, start over, go in another direction. And while that can be really great creatively, it is not very conducive to an efficient, highly structured, highly scheduled production schedule. So So I knew I needed to switch to some other process so that I could actually make it as a professional. And I totally envy the people out there who are able to just write totally by the seat of their pants and still get high quality books out fairly quickly. I'm super jealous of them, but I'm not one of them. So I developed this learning process instead.
Yeah, I've been using a sort of bare bones. I got my start in screenwriting. I was at film school down in LA, and I was doing a lot of screenplays. And screenplays are very outline intensive. But there were a number of points in the screenplay where I'd say, I don't know, some stuff is supposed to happen here. And it's very, and then I went to write novels, which are freer, and you can periodically run into problems where it's like, I don't know what's supposed to happen here. I know which point I have to get to, but what's really needed in the story at this point. So,
Yeah.
Hannah, how do you write your books?
Oh God, I got Libbie's book because I'm a hardcore pantser. And I want to be able to write faster. I want to be able to write stories that that really work, and I believe my stories work. I believe I have quite a good intuition about creating stories, and I can pants a novella without much problems. But I want to be able to write faster, and I did try outlining, and it totally killed any interest in writing the story. So I was quite fascinated by your book, because this is actually the first time someone taught me to outline in a way that I can understand it. It's I always tried to write a chapter list as an outline, and it never felt good. It never felt right. I mean, I had this. Yes, I know the 3-act structure. I know the tension arc. I mean, the whole idea. I know pacing. But just trying to structure a story into chapters and starting out writing, knowing what the end. I mean, I usually when I pants, I know the major plot points. It's not that I'm going in completely blind. I have sort of a vague roadmap, and that's helped me a lot. But writing out a chapter list takes away all the fun. I did that for one social critical literary novel that I was going to write, and I got the chapter outline done, and I thought, no, there's no way I'm going to write this. And so I really enjoyed reading your book. I love that your main focus is actually on the character, because that makes a lot of sense to me. I mean, I got my psychology background as well, so I know the fascination that a character has for a reader, and that really it's the character that keeps readers interested. So it makes a lot of sense to actually start out and have this concept of, which I loved from your first book, which is called Gotta Read It, 5 Simple Steps to Fiction Pitch That Sells. That's where you have your first character outline. It's part about a character who wants something, but something prevents him from getting what he wants, who struggles against that force, and at the end succeeds or fails. That's what I saw in your pitch book, and I loved it.
Oh, good. I'm glad you liked it. I've had really similar experiences when I first tried outlining initially too. I was just kind of like, all right, I'm gonna have this chapter, and then this is gonna happen, and this is gonna happen, and I always felt with those books like I was like pushing a character through this kind of set piece. It was like a square peg in a round hole type of thing. It just didn't really feel right. So that's why I was so glad when I finally sat down and like really thought about everything I'd learned about story structure. And I studied a lot of structure books too, including Save the Cat, which is a good one, which you probably know from screenwriting. And also,
we discussed Save the Cat a couple of weeks ago. It's not my favorite.
Yeah,
it's not my favorite.
And John Truby's book, The Anatomy of Story, and screenwriters have a lot to teach novel writers about. Oh, there you go. Very good book.
There we go.
That was definitely one of my key ones in figuring out how to adapt an outlining process to novel writing. And the focus on character and the character's internal kind of progression set against this backdrop of like an external plot progression was really like an eye-opening moment to me. I realized you could instead of setting up these chapters in advance and then kind of shoving your character through this chain of events, you could create a chain of events that pull the character naturally toward where they needed to go, as long as you base that chain of events on what the character needed to achieve for their own, personal growth. So that was kind of a big eye-opening point to me, and that's what I started basing all of my outlines on from then on.
It's funny. I've actually had this book, John Truby, for a number of years, and I have never managed to get through it because it's so heavy. And now, having read your book, I'm actually more intrigued at going back and giving it another shot. I'm like, oh,
yeah. I would encourage it. I think there's a lot of good things to learn from that book, but it is it's very thick, and it really goes into a lot of detail about each step of the process, which is great, to learn from, but it can also kind of bog you down sometimes too, I think, where you're like, oh, I don't understand the point he was trying to make anymore. So
the one that I tried to read, or that I did read right before this, was Story by Robert McKee.
Oh,
and I
yeah.
said, okay, I'm done with these gigantic analyses book. I think I should go off and write a couple 100,000 words, and then I'll go back and give it another shot.
That's probably a good idea. I've noticed a lot of the reviews for Take Off Your Pants, people have been like, I'm so glad it's short and to the point. So I think people are kind of exhausted by long, in-depth analyses of story.
Yeah,
I have to admit,
this is what this means.
Avoided.
Sorry, what, Hannah?
I've avoided most of these how to write a story books. Actually on purpose. I mean, I started writing about 15 years ago, and I'm just going back to one of my first novels, and it's pretty gruesome, but but what staying away from all these writing guides really helped me to do was to create my own feeling, my own intuition about writing, and my own path and my own voice, and I really did that quite consciously, that I avoided these teachings. I mean, I haven't even read Stephen King yet, which I probably should remedy. But I really think it gave me a certain confidence in my storytelling abilities. And now that I'm reading these books, I have a couple now, and I keep finding things that I've been trying to teach people, like make sure your character and your antagonist have reasons for what they do.
Yeah.
I mean, that's so obvious, and then so many people do this. The antagonist just wants to rule the world, and it's just not good enough.
Just people.
The thing that I really like about Libbie's book is that so many books on structure, discussing the structure of something, talk about the external events. This is where the character really commits to doing something, by doing something. This is, where the big explosion has to happen, whatever. That they even if it's an explosion of like yelling. And I really like how you break it down by really the character's arc. It actually makes it a much easier way to think about, and I'm kind of embarrassed that I never thought about that before.
Well, it's not, especially because so many craft books and craft discussions and everything do focus so much on those like point-by-point events, these like external events that the character is kind of responding to.
Right.
It's not really as intuitive as really it should be to think about a story in terms of what's going on inside of your character. Those external events do matter, because otherwise, if your book is nothing but somebody sitting around thinking like, oh, I should change myself for the better, well, I guess I should find some motivation to do that. That's not fun to read either. Like, we need the external events to sort of keep things exciting, but they really are the least important aspect of a story, I think, or at least I should say they're the most changeable aspect of a story. They're not concrete. Like, once you figure out what your character's personal progression is going to be, you can change anything about the plot, and the core of the story, which is that character's internal activity of going through this change, is going to be the same. It's going to be the same story at its heart, no matter what you do to manipulate the plot and change it.
Mm-hmm.
what do you think? I created a little PowerPoint thingy that I could show to our listeners and viewers. What do you think? Should I just pop it up and we'll talk about the concept that's behind it? Would that be okay?
Sure, absolutely.
All right. Let me just pull it up.
We're so polite.
Here we go. And Libby was just talking about the story core, and I was just rattling these off a moment ago.
Right.
But Libby, I think this is the fundamental part of a story. Would you mind explaining this a little?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, I agree. This is the fundamental part of the story. In fact, this is what I think every good story out there has in its core, hiding in there somewhere. It's like buried sometimes, but it's in there. So every story has a character, of course. The character wants something, so they've got, they realize some sort of goal that they want to work toward. But it's not just easy to, go out and get what they want. It's not just a walk in the park. They actually come up against some sort of force, an antagonist, that prevents them from getting what they want so easily. So they struggle against that force. They work toward that goal, but it just gets harder and harder, and they, experience discouragement and have to change their tactics and all that good stuff. There's this whole battle that goes on. And in the end, this is kind of crucial, they either succeed or fail. There's an ending to the story. It wraps up and provides some sense of closure.
Yeah, and I think if we didn't have the struggle in the story, we probably wouldn't have a story.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just, if it's like, oh, I want something, oh, here's this force in my way, well, I guess that's that, That's not really a story.
And the next picture shows the three elements that basically form the outline. I hope I got that right. Let me just head over to the next whatever. Yes.
Yeah, so the way I structure my outlines, and I guess what makes it a little bit different maybe from what some other people may think of when they talk about outlining, is instead of focusing on the scene or the action, as we were talking about earlier, like that, chapter by chapter, this happens and this happens and this happens, instead I focus on three other things, which I think are even more crucial than that. First of all, the character arc. So what's going on inside the character to propel them along this path of kind of internal change to sort of make themselves a better, stronger person so that they can achieve their goal that they're struggling against the antagonist to attain. Also, I think pacing is incredibly important. It's something that we often don't think about. It's also something that I think many writers don't think about because it's something we tend to sort of get naturally. If you're really into stories, you'll kind of pick up on pacing by yourself and you'll inject that into your writing without really thinking about it. But it is something that you sort of want to check and just make sure it's there before you really start writing the book. Because if you hit points of your book as you're outlining or as you're writing it, where the action kind of starts to flag and your characters are kind of losing sight of their path, or things are just like starting to happen that don't really bear that directly on the story itself, you'll lose the readers at those points. So making sure that pacing is really, really tight is something that I do in the outline phase, just so that I know before I start writing this book that it's definitely going to like whoosh, propel that reader all the way along from the beginning to the end. And then incredibly important, and something that a lot of writers don't think about at all, is theme. I use theme in all of my stories. It doesn't need to be big and deep and like the type of theme that people would talk about in academic institutions or anything like that, but it needs to be in there somewhere. Some kind of a unifying idea that sort of gathers all the aspects of your story together kind of under one little umbrella. And you can use this really effectively as you're writing to decide whether to keep or discard a scene or an idea or a subplot. If it doesn't bear on the theme that you've chosen for this book, you can safely get rid of it and your story is still going to feel complete. In fact, it will feel more complete if you get rid of it and just keep stuff that's focused on your theme. A lot of times, you can tell sometimes, I think, if a book doesn't really have a cohesive theme by reading some of the reviews. You'll see a lot of comments from people that say things like, stuff happened that just didn't make any sense. Things were just happening that just felt so out of place. The character was doing stuff that I just didn't understand. And that's because readers tend to pick up on these sort of subliminal themes, like the overall sort of flavor of a story. And if something happens that's just a little bit off flavor that maybe feels like it belongs in a different story or something, that's going to stand out in their mind. It's going to be something that's kind of a stumbling block to their enjoying the story. So that's why I actually include theme as a very important aspect of my outlines.
I think it absolutely makes perfect sense, and I would like to show our viewers how thorough your view of a story is by going to the next sheet. I forgot what these things are called. My program is in German.
Slides.
Slides. Slide is good. Okay. Aha.
Oh, there's this
I don't
part.
know my presentation.
It's a process, definitely.
Yeah, this is the process.
Oh,
and
technology. Stop it.
This is just sort of, as I'm actually sitting down to write my outline, this is kind of how I lay it out. So I'll have that little 5-step process that we talked about initially that's kind of the core of the story. I fill that out with who my character is, what he's going to be going after in here, who his antagonist is going to be. The part that says plot heading there is the part that corresponds to the bit where he struggles to get what he wants. And we'll expand that. You'll see in the next slide it expands quite big into the actual events of the plot. And then the ending is just kind of where I sketch in. Is this going to be a happy ending, a sad ending? Is he going to get what he wants? Is he not going to get what he wants? How is he going to resolve his internal issue? I do lay out what the character's internal issue is because I think it's really important to understand what your character's weakness is. I think characters who don't have any sort of weakness at all get kind of dry and boring and impossible to follow. A lot of people have challenged me on this. They've read the book and emailed me and been like, well, what about, James Bond or whatever? James Bond does have some weaknesses. He just doesn't realize they're weaknesses. And you'll see them in some of the books like, is it Goldfinger where he drives across the country in all of them, right? But there's one where he drives across the country and he's really tempted to stop and, get romantic with a Bond girl that he meets along the way, and he doesn't. He keeps going. He has to keep going or the bad guy's going to catch him or he won't be able to outwit the bad guy. It's been a long time since I've read this, so I can't remember. But that's a display of his flaw right there. He's a total womanizer, and it almost his flaw almost stops him. It almost makes him fall prey to his bad guy. So even in with these iconic characters who seem very unchangeable, I think there are little flaws in there that the author can use to sort of heighten the tension of the plot now and then. So I also describe who the character's ally is. This is a concept I learned from John Truby in that Anatomy of Story book, which Diane showed us earlier. Really important. An ally is a character, we tend to think of an ally as it's your character's friend who helps him out, and that is true in some respects, but really the crucial part the ally plays in the story is by being the one person or force sometimes who has the ability to stop the main character from choosing his incorrect path and to force him onto the right path where he'll finally end up in a confrontation against the antagonist. So the ally is the character who has the most ability to exert serious psychological control over your character. Very important to include in a story, because otherwise your character could just continue to convince themselves until the end of time that it's perfectly okay for them to just keep doing what they're doing and never really face down their demons. So you need the ally for that. And then of course I jot down my theme, which we talked about earlier, and make sure that's really clear to myself before I continue with the outlining process.
So you work out the theme before you start writing?
I usually do. Sometimes I get a little bit stuck and I can't figure out an exact theme for the book. If that's the case, I go ahead and just keep outlining. And if I haven't been able to figure out a clear theme by the time I finish the outline, I know I need to stop and go back and look at the outline itself. Something's wrong with it. There should be sort of a universal concept by the time you get to the end of that book that you can use as you're writing it to kind of help yourself clarify, like we talked about earlier, deciding what you're going to keep, what you're going to discard as you work on the book. So you should have some concept of that at least by the time you get to the end of outlining the book.
It's funny. I think writers get really messed up when you start talking about theme, not only because of high school English classes, but because various structuralists call it different things.
Yeah, that's true.
I'm pretty sure that William Goldman refers to it as the spine.
Yeah,
It's something hanging off the spine.
Yeah.
So it was funny that you brought up James Bond, who is always brought up for these things. And it's actually something that I've wondered, because I'm writing a mystery series. Are you doing a series under any of these various pen names?
Oh yeah, I do lots of series. Yeah, I'm in the midst of one series right now that actually has 14 main characters, and each one of them has their own outlined arc, and almost all of them span over all 3 books in the series. So it took me
my
like a
goodness.
week and a half to get that all outlined. It's
Holy
crazy.
McGillicuddy.
Let's shift to
First book
the
comes out on
actual
June 1st.
outline.
We'll see how it works out.
Wait, I want to, before we go on, Hannah, the series characters, I mean, the hardest thing certainly that I've found with mine, since she is a very flawed character, is working on something without resolving it. Or,
Yeah.
you know, she makes a little bit of a turn realizing her flaws, but we can't get rid of all of them or pretty much the series is over.
Yeah.
How do you work that with your series characters?
Well, in all the series I've written so far, they're not intended to be like eternally open-ended series. Like they all have planned endings, so eventually all the characters like reach the end of their plots in that. But a really good example of like a super open-ended series with the same character that just keeps going forever is the Stephanie Plum series by Janet Ivanovich, which you're probably familiar with as a mystery writer. And in that one, Stephanie's always like, I mean, she's a big giant ditz, and she always kind of overcomes that in each book just enough to figure out the mystery. And she's like, oh, I'm smarter now. And then she always goes right back to where she was before, which is perfectly acceptable. Like, you know, it's fine to take your character back to square one for each new book if you want to. A lot of readers really enjoy that. So there goes my husband who don't have to work. Yeah, but it's totally okay to you know, not entirely resolve your character's issues if you want to just, I mean, like James Bond just keeps on being a ridiculous womanizer.
Yeah. I know they
again.
keep trying to come up with these stories where he's going to hook up with only one woman.
Yeah.
We know what's going to happen to her. So.
Yeah. Exactly.
Okay, Hannah. Yes. Next slide.
Here we go.
Here, go brace yourselves.
A huge one.
And this is like a truncated version. So this is where I actually outline line 4 of that kind of core of the story where the characters struggle. So this illustrates the characters' struggle as they attempt to get what they want. And basically I just kind of go from the top to the bottom. By this time I know my characters' internal issues pretty well. I know the antagonist and ally. Most crucially, I know the theme of the book. So I know where I need to bring this by the end. So I will fill in, usually I'll actually start with like, I typically kind of know exactly how I want the book to end, and I'll kind of fill that in, and then I'll go back up to the top and I'll just like, opening scene. Where do I need to have this character start logically in order to get them to the point where they realize what their external goal is? So opening scene, there's an initiating event that makes them, you know, sort of realize that their life is in shambles and that they need this goal in order to be happy. They need to obviously show their flaw very early on in order to make the reader realize that, hey, there's going to be an attempt to overcome this flaw. So they do that, they start their struggle, they meet up with their antagonist, and they continue to struggle against their antagonist, and they meet all these kinds of you know, blocks to achieving their goal. It's very frustrating, they keep getting thwarted, and they get more and more angry, and they keep trying other tactics to reach their goal. Finally, usually right before the ally forces them back onto the true path, they'll change their goal altogether. Often they'll be like, fine, I don't want that anymore, I'm going to do this other thing, and wander off from my duties and you know, go do my own thing. Ally forces them back onto the path. They realize they really, really have to do what their friend tells them. They brace themselves for the real fight to come, and then they really face down the antagonist. And death is another concept I learned from John Truby. It's not literally a death, usually. Sometimes it is. But instead, it's the death of that flaw of theirs that's preventing them from growing as a person and achieving the goal that they wanted. So they kind of like kill their own demons, and that finally allows them to hopefully achieve the goal. Sometimes they actually fail, but they achieve the internal goal, which is to overcome that flaw. So then they reach, you know, the end of the story, either positive or negative, and that's it. So that's pretty much.
You're done.
You're done. Now you can start writing.
Awesome. I have one more slide for all those people who watched our podcast on structure, where we talked a lot about the 3-act structure, and I really believe a lot of people are familiar with it. So I took the liberty of
So my way of looking at it, by the way, Libby, is that all structures are fundamentally the same. We can map any structure onto any other structure.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much true.
Yeah.
So I just poured in some color.
Ta-da! Yeah, and you can kind of see the 3 acts basically fall right onto that.
Yeah, I looked at it and I really thought, how would that work with a 3-act structure? Because so many people are familiar with it, and so many people are possibly subconsciously following it. And just in order to see that this actually works, I created the colors to represent the 3 acts. And as you can see, the middle part is the longest part, with the whole struggle, with this whole do I really want to do this, and until everything finally coalesces to the final confrontation and actually the resolution. So I think it actually works. I mean, I love your detailed structure, but I really think it does fit into the 3-act idea.
Yeah, I think it does fit in neatly to 3-act idea. I don't, and a few people have emailed me to ask why I didn't include anything about the 3 acts in my outline book, and it's just because I don't pay any attention to, making sure I have 3 specific acts in my outlines, and that's mainly because I don't really feel like I need to, because it sort of builds itself into this structure. Like, you get that sort of sense of beginning, middle, end.
Natural flow.
With this structure, yeah. So, but yeah, you can see definitely how it does fit into the traditional kind of 3-act feel that a lot of stories do have.
And definitely my big excitement while reading your book was the way that you describe, let me go back to the slide here, what order does this go in? Driving towards a goal, the antagonist revealed or attacks. And how they're thwarted, and how you describe each one of those elements, because that is the Great Sahara Desert of Act 2, right? It's
yep.
the best description I've ever heard of Act 2 is that's the movie everybody came to see, but what elements go into that are sometimes extremely hard to work out. How do I get the protagonist from point A to point B?
Yeah, that is a really tough part, and that's where a lot of the fun of writing comes in too. You have to invent, logical steps from the end of your Act 1 that will lead you into like the first logical step in your Act 2, and just kind of push you along on that. And I do talk about some ways to do that in the book too, which has a lot to do with pacing, and a whole lot to do with theme too. Like, as long as that's part of the reason why I'm such a stickler about knowing my character's flaw before I start writing, and also having a theme chosen, because that helps you select the right types of scenes to put into that sort of Sahara Desert in the middle. And as long as you're making these choices based on the same criteria every time. How does this relate to my character's arc? How does this relate to theme? As long as you're always using those same principles to make those decisions about your book's always going to feel very unified and relevant to itself. It's not going to feel like it sort of dwindles off into this weird, realm where you're just talking about the characters' costumes and what they ate for lunch, and no one understands the point you're trying to make. And you don't understand
long
the point you're trying to make.
conversations where the characters have really long, witty conversations and nothing happens.
Nothing happens.
And I know I used to write that way. People would say, Diane, is something going to happen soon? And now I'm really cognizant of when I come across it in a book. I'm like, you're just padding here. Let's get back to the story.
And often it's because you're in that middle section and you're trying to figure out I got to do something that'll get my character to this other point where I know they need to go. So yeah, it's tough.
So one of the things you were talking about pacing. When you write out this outline, and in the book, by the way, she gives an abbreviated outline for one of the main characters of her book, Pocahontas.
Tidewater. Yeah.
Oh, Tidewater, sorry.
That's okay, but the character's Pocahontas.
Pocahontas. Yes, the outline is for the character Pocahontas. That's it. Nice save. In which she talks about these, setting up for the character and the various sequences of the driving for the goal, meeting the antagonist, getting thwarted, et cetera, et cetera. When you work this up, I know that you're very familiar with your own writing, obviously. Do you just have a feeling for how many words that's going to be? Or do you say, this section can only be 5,000 words, and if I'm not done by then, I have to rethink it? I mean...
Yeah, good question. I've never really put restrictions on, like, I don't really build a word count into each beat of the outline. I just kind of give myself however many words I need to achieve that goal in the outline. But I do, you know, I've written like 15 books or something by now, just novels, not counting other stuff. So I know, I have a pretty good feel for like how many words it takes me to achieve that. So I can finish an outline and like look at how long it is, how many beats it has in it, how many times I go through that like facing the antagonist and getting thwarted cycle, and it can give me a really good idea of how many words I'm gonna come out with in the end.
Okay.
So I sort of know myself enough to know how many words it'll take me to get there. So I can estimate it pretty easily that way. But yeah, I don't try to like make myself stick to, you know, 2,500 words here, 5,000 words here, or whatever. I just do what needs to be done to get the job done.
So that's still a kind of fancy element in your writing.
Yeah. Yes, it is.
Yeah, that was something that I wondered about, and I want to look at this here. For instance, in one of these sequences where Pocahontas has a new drive for the goal, deals with the antagonist, and now I've completely lost the page. Where are you guys? There you are. And then she has to regroup and gets thwarted. Is that the finest detail that you go into for that sequence? You know, like when you're doing that sequence, that's all that's going to happen there, or do you break it down into smaller?
I don't. I actually go beyond to do what I call a beat outline or a plot heading outline, as I think you refer to it in Take Off Your Pants. Most people call it a beat outline, where I will take, you know, once I've filled out that, like, okay, you know, she realizes her goal and she meets her antagonist, you know, those are like the plot headings. And I take each of those plot headings and I expand those into, like, you know, a paragraph or two to sort of delineate exactly what's going to happen in that scene. And then that'll kind of give me an idea of sort of how the whole chapter will look. Typically, I do like one chapter per plot heading. Not always. And that's a part where, like, if you are a big pantser, you can stop right there. Like, you don't have to go into doing those plot heading beats. You can kind of leave that open-ended, and it still gives you a lot of creative freedom to like enjoy the process of sort of discovering as you write, but you still have that structure to know that you're going to have a tight, relevant, well-paced, enjoyable story before you begin. So it's going to reduce all those wasted words where you're like writing off into some corner, and then you realize that you just used up 2 weeks of writing time and you have to go back and start from the beginning. I think we've all been there many times. So yeah, it does still allow a lot of flexibility for if you like that process of kind of in writing discovery, which I do like a lot too. But typically, like, because I kind of am on a tight schedule and I've always got a project that I need to get out by a deadline nowadays, I pretty much outline everything all the way through to the chapter beats.
So as a former pantser, you don't find that this process, like some people go through an outline process and they go, well, I've told the story now. I don't need to go through this again. You still find the excitement of making that beat of the outline actually come to life, or?
Yeah, I mean, I really enjoy it. It was something I did kind of have to teach myself to enjoy because, yeah, I do like that creative flexibility. But, you know, my biggest goal in learning how to outline effectively was to increase my production and, you know, speed up my books and know from the beginning that I was going to be writing a good, enjoyable book. So once I had that proof in front of me that I had a good, enjoyable book on my hands, it's just a matter of, you know, putting the actual words in and turning it into a novel. So it's not as fun as just like randomly discovering your writing, but it's certainly much better for my bank account. You know, you can get way more books out faster.
How much faster do you think you are using that outline technique? I mean, you said you publish about 14 books a year. I mean, that's more than one a month.
Yeah, I mean, I write a lot, and I kind of sit on a lot of them while they go through edits, so I'm not just like write one, publish one, write one, publish one. You know, I have all of them sort of sitting in this like limbo of edits all the time.
Yeah, I mean, you would have a story flow basically
Yeah.
from writing through editing to formatting and
Yeah,
publishing.
exactly.
I mean, that's kind of something that I realized when I started seeing writing as a business. You'd have a product flow basically from the creative part all the way until the finished published one.
Right.
You have a chart on the wall of where everything is, and
kind of, yeah, on my tablet. But to answer your question, it has increased my speed dramatically, like crazy. I don't spend as much time anymore in edits trying to like go back and restructure stuff that didn't need to be in that story in the first place, which is huge. And just you know, knowing in advance, like when I sit down to start a novel, I have that outline in front of me. I know it's going to flow from point A to point B. I know it's going to be well-paced. I know it's going to be thematically relevant to itself. And I know it's got a complete character arc in it that's going to feel intriguing and also resolved by the end of it to a reader. So I know I've got a good book on my hands that's ready to go. I don't have to sit and think about this stuff when I'm in the process of writing it. I just follow, you know, the roadmap I've created in my outline. So the longest book I ever, or the slowest book I ever wrote was one called Baptism for the Dead, which took me 2 years of writing in total, just going by the seat of my pants. And so far, my fastest book was a 92,000 word novel in 3 weeks. So it's a big change. I'm like,
just for whatever listeners we have listening to this, what was your output, say, in 2008, 2009, book-wise?
It took me between like the summer of 2008 through the summer of 2009 to write my first novel. It was 120,000 words when I finished it. After I got through developmental edits, it was 90,000 words. So I obviously had wasted a lot of time.
I've done that.
1,000 extra words into that book. So that took a long time. I took 2010 and 2011 to write Baptism for the Dead. And it's a good book, and I'm glad I wrote it, but it was not an efficient use of my time at all. 2012, I wrote 4 novels. I was still working full-time during that time. 2013, I also wrote 4 more novels. I haven't used all of them yet. And yeah, and this year alone, I've already written 4 novels for this year and a few novellas.
And this is May 15th, people.
Yeah, so a slow month for me now is 80,000 words, and a more kind of typical work month for me is about 100 to 120,000 words. That's if I'm like working, you know, full 8 hours every day and not screwing around on the internet. So, so yeah, it has definitely like crazily increased my production, which is what I set out to do when I started doing this. And that's part of why I wanted to get this book out there, because I know a lot of people really struggle with, you know, how do you keep a novel focused as you're writing it? How do you make sure you're using your time as efficiently as possible? And this particular outlining method for me was definitely like key to doing it. So. Yeah.
So
the thing
how long does it?
Oh, go ahead, Hannah.
So how long does it take you to actually sit down and outline such a novel?
A lot of that depends on the complexity of the book or the series. When we talked about that series I'm working on right now that ends up, you know, at its peak with like 14 point of view characters, and I mean, it's crazy. It's like really, it's like Game of Thrones in ancient Egypt. It's just like, wah! That one took me like a week to a week and a half, I think, to get the outline all together and make sure, you know, everyone's storylines like tied into each other in sensible ways. But typically it takes me like 1 to 4 hours usually to just, you know, an average novel that has 1, maybe 2 main characters and is going to be about 90,000 words in length. It'll take me about, 1 to 4 hours on average.
That's impressive.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
A lot of practice, though. I mean, I've put a lot of practice into getting there, so people will get there with time. You just got to, you know, find a method that works for you and then keep hammering away at it, and, you know, the more you do it, the better you get.
It's funny. I can pants novellas. I can keep it all in my head, and I can sit down every day and write 3,000 or 4,000 words, no problem, because I can see where I'm going. Yeah. With a novel, I lose the plot about midway through.
Yeah, it's much bigger. There's more stuff that happens in a novel, and it's easy to get lost, you know?
Yeah. Especially in the middle.
Yeah.
Especially in the middle, the Great Sahara Desert. You know, because we know Act 1 is set. Well, sorry to use these terms. We know Act 1 is setting everything up, and Act 3 is all the, you know, setting all the dominoes off.
Yeah.
It's Act 2 that wandering in the high weeds.
That's why I think theme is so useful, because it definitely, I mean, it's such a handy tool. Once you figure out a theme for your book, you're stuck in that middle, and you're like, well, should I put in a scene where this happens? And you can kind of check it and be like, what does it have to do with the theme, though? Like, what does it have to do with the concept that unifies this novel? Nothing? Okay, I can discard that idea and something else, you know? So that works out really well. I mean, I just recently finished a book for my traditional publisher, Lake Union Publishing, that it's about Zenobia, who was this really cool Syrian warrior queen. She had a fascinating life and all this cool stuff that happened in her life. But I had chosen a particular theme for that book, and there were some, you know, aspects of her real life biography that I just couldn't figure out to fit into the novelization in a way that made sense with that theme. And that book easily could have been like twice as long and very rambly and pointless feeling if I included all this stuff. Like, it's all interesting history, but if it just kind of like wanders away from the theme, you're going to lose readers there. So I had to make the choice to like cut out parts of history and stay really tightly focused on this idea of, you know, power and hubris in order to, you know, keep that book feeling tight-paced and compelling. So, yep, it helps you make tough choices.
I'm actually going to use this technique to I've run into, as Hannah gets to hear every week, I'm like, nope, haven't figured out the problems with book 4 yet. I'm going to go back and structure everything this way and see if maybe I can work through the tangle I have.
Good. I hope it helps you. Yeah. I mean, it's not going to be the right method for everybody. I know that, but a lot of people have responded to it really favorably, which is great to see, and people seem to be finding a lot of use with my method. So that's nice.
Well, I read someone on a board somewhere, not K-boards, saying, well, she seems to be setting up the outline for a very specific type of book, and this was before I'd actually read the book, and then I read it and I said, no, this is pretty standard outline. She's just explicating how to do all of these things in a way that you can, it's not just this happens and this happens and this happens, they're all happening for a reason.
Oh, goodness, I bet I could tell which forum that is just based on the attitude of the person who said that. There's a reason I don't hate forum anymore, and that's because my craft is much better from not being there.
No, this wasn't K-boards.
No, I'm not talking about K-boards.
Oh, okay.
I'm talking about starts with an A and ends with a W.
No, oh God, no.
Oh, really?
My God, I haven't gone there in years.
Yeah, good. That's the best choice you've ever made for yourself, honestly.
You know, it was really useful. Like when I was looking for an agent in 2008, it was a fabulous resource. Oh my God.
Definitely.
But the level, it's like every board seems to get this level of crap. Anyhow.
Yeah, after a while the boards become less useful, I think, after you sort of figure out your own career path and how you're going to get there. It's great early on for learning from other people and sort of taking in a whole bunch of different ideas that you can test out. But after a while, you got to make your own way, I think. So.
Well, I think it's also. Have you ever heard of I don't know what they call self-development guru? I think that's what I don't know. Named Jim Rohn. His name is Jim Rohn, and his famous quote is, "You are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with."
Oh, dear God.
Look around at the people on the board you're spending time with and say, do I really want to be with these people?
Yeah, probably not. And that's probably fairly true. I think we have a lot of, we're social creatures. We get influenced very heavily by our society, so choose it wisely. Oh, yeah. But I mean, the outline does set up for a very particular type of book, a compelling, tight-paced book that readers want to read. If that's not what you're looking to write, feel free to try something different. And that's not to say that this is the only way to make a tight, compelling book that readers want to read. Of course it's not. There are many ways to skin a cat. But the outline method is universal enough that, I've applied it to books in multiple different genres, to short fiction, lengthier stuff, like you can do short stories, novellas, novels with this. You could probably do flash and drabbles with it, but I've never tried that myself. It works for any genre because it's not focused on plot events. It's focused on what's happening to a character, and every story has a character. So
yeah, you could probably take this outline and just for the fun of it, have a character with a certain flaw and a certain goal, and just work their way through historical fiction, paranormal, fantasy, science fiction, whatever. You probably take the same person and tell the same story, in a different background. I mean, it would be
Yes,
it would
absolutely.
be awesome. That would be an awesome anthology to create, having a sort of like novella-like story with a character going through the same development on a different background. That could
That
be an
would be
awesome
fun.
project.
That would be really cool. If anybody ever wants to do an anthology like that, I'd be down for it. It'd be really fun. Yeah,
Oh God!
you can do that.
I just volunteered for a project. Well, we'll see. We'll see about that. I have enough.
Well, I have to say, I personally am pretty intrigued by the idea of upping my production count, because I've been kind of disappointed at how many books I've been able to write. Sort of, the novellas go very fast, and the novels are like pulling teeth. So
yeah, and I think this might help you. I mean, if it's a technique that happens to resonate with you, you'll probably see your productivity increase a lot, which is great, because I mean the main benefit it provides in terms of productivity is making sure you're not writing off into like corners that don't apply to the book. So it will definitely, you know, keep you tightly focused on just that central line of the story, which is good for you because it increases your production, and it's good for your readers too because it doesn't get boring that way. You know, you're never going to be like, There are some writers out there, I don't know how they do it. They can write the longest, hugest, beefiest novels, and they're intriguing all the way through. Like Margaret George has these historical novels that are like this thick, and I love them. I can't put them down. They're great. She's the only person, I think, in this genre who can do that. There are a lot of fantasy authors who can do it too, but man, I don't know how they do it. Like, I couldn't. I've tried. Like, I start writing books and try to make them, like, just big and meaty and like, exploring every potential aspect of, like, a historical background. And it just, like, my editor's like, this is really boring. You gotta cut, like, all this out. So...
Well, I'm definitely going to try this technique to rework my old book. That is the second one that I wrote, and I still love the character. I just started translating it from German into English because I'm German, and for a while back I only wrote in German. And I just got into the third chapter, and I'm thinking to myself, this is so boring. You can't do this to the readers. You need to change this.
Yeah, give it a try. It might help you really kind of like figure out what needs to stay and go in that. So.
Oh, it's very much a development novel. It's basically following a boy's growth into being a man, and I'm really thinking about the whole thing. What's his flaw? What is actually the antagonist? What does he really want? Does he even get it? It's part of a series, so he doesn't really completely get it at the end. But So this really has made me think a lot, and I'm totally grateful. You started me thinking with the other book about the blurbs, and I'm so glad you wrote this one because it really explains the whole concept. And I totally encourage our listeners and viewers to go and get it because you won't regret it. Libbie really goes through every single step and explains in detail what you have to do, and I love the part about the pacing with your inverted triangles. I just love that.
Thanks. That's definitely a concept I've found from other writers too, like before me. But I sort of figured this out on my own first, and then I read it in John Truby's book, and I was like, I wasn't wrong. It really does do that. So I was all like, Yeah. But yeah, that was a big eye-opening moment for me too. That pacing triangle thing. You're like, whoa! It just made everything so much easier.
So we didn't go into that in the show, but that's another reason why I really say go. It's not a huge investment. Go read this book. It's short. It's clear. It's to the point. It's absolutely inspiring. So.
And it's not prescriptive in the way that so many books are.
Not at all.
It says, here are some things, fill these out, but you pick what they are,
Yeah.
You figure out whether this is internal or external or, it was interesting how you said that this applies to literary fiction in the same way as genre fiction. I'm primarily a genre fiction writer, but it's good to know that it applies to those snooty literary types too.
Yeah, it's story is story, and we're compelled by exactly the same things in any story, no matter what kind of genre we're reading, or whether it's a children's book or an adult book or whatever. It's all the same stuff when you dig down deep enough and find the center of the story. So, yep, you can apply it to anything. It's pretty cool.
Yes,
I
remembering
really,
the characters are the central part of our stories. Yes.
I think it's part. I mean, I've been talking about this in almost every show, but I think it's part of our innate storytelling. I don't know what you want to call it, ability, talent. Um, because we humans, as social beings, have the storytelling gene. And to just figure out what makes a story work is so valuable to any writer.
I agree. Yeah, it's a huge, colossal part of being able to write successfully, and knowing how story works and how it all comes together. So it's
And
good stuff.
productivity, this is key to being a 21st century writer. I mean, because I've been working
Productivity.
to up my productivity, but it certainly is key because you need a bunch of books to just pull in readers and to bring in readers from different directions.
Yeah.
And I'm admiring any pro author who just keeps publishing books. I've seen you do it, I've seen others do it, and it's amazing. And I'm really on the journey to figure out how to get this productivity going.
Yeah.
And I want to produce a
We'll
lot
get
of
there.
books that I'm satisfied with. I mean,
Yeah.
I know
Yes.
lots of people who produce a certain type of book that they're certainly making more money than I am, but a lot of them are like, oh God, this again.
Yeah. I would lose interest pretty quickly, I think, if I had to do too similar a story over and over again. It would get kind of tedious, so yeah.
It would be. Well, we've basically reached the end of our hour together.
Yes. So thank you so
That
much,
was
Libbie.
fun.
I really appreciate your coming in and joining us for this.
Oh, no problem. Thanks for having me. It was great.
Oh, this is great, yeah.
It was, I mean, awesome to really get all the details about your story, about your book, and I promise there's a lot more in the book.
Oh, this is a tremendous book. I really, really, because so often structure books are the standard structure that people tell you is Act 1, get your character up a tree, Act 2, throw rocks at him, Act 3, get him down, and people would say that to me, and I'd be like, what does that mean?
Yeah, I know.
What are you talking about?
Okay.
horrible
Trees?
advice.
There are no trees in my novel. Rocks? So having something, a way of thinking about things, and certainly distilling something like this book down. Like I said, I've had it for years, could never get through it. It's great. It's really a fabulous, fabulous tool for writers.
Oh,
So,
great.
thank you.
I'm surprised that that book is that thick because I only read the ebook version, but I read it like a few times, and now I'm really impressed with myself that I got through it so fast. It's pretty easy.
That's huge.
Yeah, 420 something hardback pages.
Wowie, that's definitely.
And I'm
impressive.
sitting there with the book going, trying to up the size of the
I
text.
all the time now, or like, I'll sit there with an actual paper page in front of me and try to swipe it to turn it. Like, oh, it's not working. Oh, that's fine.
Okay, the book is Take Off Your Pants by Libbie Hawker. Buy it, read it, use it. My name is Diane Patterson.
And I'm Hannah Steinbach.
And we will talk to you next week.
And we don't have a topic yet.
Yeah, I know. I didn't decide on our topic. We'll come up with a topic. We're pretty good at that. Thank you for joining us. Bye, Libbie.
Bye.
Bye.